Elon Musk's bombshell shakes America. The night of the interview was electric with anticipation. For weeks, rumors had been swirling about Tesla CEO Elon Musk and his next big public statement. Known for his often controversial comments and unfiltered opinions, Musk had earned a reputation for stirring the pot. Whether it was with his bold tweets about artificial intelligence or his audacious plans for space exploration. But this time, the stakes were far higher. This wasn't just another off-the-cuff remark about a new tech gadget or an experimental rocket. This was something much bigger. The air was thick with suspense as the interview began. The setting was sleek and polished, a primetime special broadcasted across multiple news outlets. As the host, a seasoned journalist known for tackling tough subjects, welcomed Musk onto the stage, the audience seemed to hold its collective breath. The host began by asking Musk about his views on the future of technology and business, but Musk, ever the master of suspense, kept his cards close to his chest. The conversation meandered through space exploration and the rise of artificial intelligence, but Musk remained uncharacteristically reserved. It wasn't until the host shifted the conversation to politics that Musk's demeanor subtly changed. His voice dropped slightly, his eyes glinting with a mix of seriousness and intrigue. "I have something I think the American people need to know," Musk began, his words carefully chosen, yet tinged with an undeniable weight. The room fell silent, and viewers across the country felt the shift in the atmosphere. Something monumental was coming. With the calmness of someone delivering news that had been carefully prepared, Musk made his startling claim. "I have hard evidence linking Hunter Biden to illegal activities with overseas entities, and it implicates his father, President Joe Biden, as well." His words echoed through the room, reverberating into living rooms, offices, and bars across the nation. A shocked gasp rippled through the audience as the host's eyes widened. But Musk was already continuing, his words cascading like a flood. He went on to explain that the evidence he had, while sensitive, showed a clear link between Hunter Biden's foreign business dealings and actions that could be considered illegal, implicating the Biden family directly in a corruption scheme. He didn't provide the specifics on the evidence, but the suggestion was clear enough. Hunter Biden, along with other key figures in the Biden family, had been operating on a global scale that went far beyond what had previously been reported. Musk's assertion wasn't just another conspiracy theory. He had something tangible, something serious, that could topple the very foundation of the Biden administration. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Social media lit up like a firestorm, with pundits and citizens alike scrambling to discuss and dissect Musk's bombshell claim. The usual political commentators, many of whom had made their careers defending the Democratic Party, now found themselves backpedaling, either questioning Musk's credibility or scrambling to verify his statements. On the other side of the aisle, Republicans quickly seized on Musk's words, using them as ammunition in their ongoing battle against the Biden administration. The allegations were now everywhere, pushed relentlessly into the spotlight by every major news outlet, from cable news to online platforms. As the interview came to an end, the host tried to regain control of the conversation, asking Musk for more details, but Musk remained tight-lipped, offering no further specifics. He simply nodded and smiled, allowing the ambiguity to fester in the minds of his audience. His silence only added to the frenzy. Musk's enigmatic refusal to divulge more left everyone wanting more, and the power of that uncertainty added layers to the shock of the initial claim. No one knew exactly what evidence Musk had, but the mere suggestion was enough to send the nation into a tailspin. The next few hours were a blur of conflicting statements, with reporters scrambling to get their hands on any leaked documents or credible sources that might corroborate Musk's claim. Yet, in the absence of concrete evidence, speculation ran rampant. Were Musk's accusations based on personal vendettas? Was this just another case of a tech mogul trying to make waves for the sake of media attention? Or was there something more to this? Something dark and hidden just beneath the surface? In the White House, President Biden's team was already working overtime. His communications director immediately issued a statement denouncing the claims as baseless and politically motivated. But the damage was already done. The president's staff tried to calm the situation by asserting that Musk had no real proof. But the public wasn't so easily placated. People wanted answers, and they wanted them fast. The public was already demanding transparency, questioning whether the Bidens were involved in activities far worse than the average American could imagine. The Biden administration faced an entirely new kind of crisis. Political analysts and strategists, many of whom had confidently assumed that Biden would sail smoothly into his next term, now found themselves pondering the possibility of an unraveling. The stakes had been raised to an entirely new level. A single interview had shifted the entire political narrative. Musk, a man who was largely seen as a figure of the future and innovation, had thrust the past squarely into the present, with explosive consequences. The interviews and debates that followed were only the beginning of a political maelstrom. The White House quickly became a focal point of criticism from all sides, while President Biden himself was forced into a delicate balancing act, trying to fend off the accusations without appearing defensive. The public, once supportive of his presidency, now found themselves divided. Some stood firmly behind Biden, dismissing Musk's statements as a political attack, while others, once loyal, now began to question the integrity of the very people they had voted for. In the weeks that followed, the air remained thick with tension. People weren't just talking about the usual political back and forth. They were questioning the foundations of power itself. Musk's bombshell had opened a door that no one could close, and the echoes of his words would reverberate through every campaign, every election, and every conversation for the foreseeable future. The question now was whether the Biden family could survive the storm Musk had unleashed, or whether the storm would change the course of American history forever. The news spread like wildfire. Within moments of Elon Musk's explosive claims, the political world seemed to fracture, each side quickly picking up the pieces in an attempt to shape the narrative to their advantage. What had been a relatively calm evening in Washington turned into a frenetic rush of reactions. Social media platforms buzzed with hashtags, memes, and heated debates, while news outlets scrambled to cover every angle of Musk's allegations. On the left, there was skepticism and denial, while on the right, outrage surged. The atmosphere was thick with tension as the implications of Musk's statements began to settle in. Republicans wasted no time seizing on the opportunity. The allegations against Hunter Biden, President Joe Biden's son, were not new to them. For years, conservative lawmakers had pushed stories of corruption involving Hunter's business dealings in Ukraine and China. But Musk's comments gave those stories newfound urgency. They now had the backing of a high-profile figure whose words could not easily be dismissed as partisan noise. Suddenly, a decades-old narrative was thrust into the public eye with the force of a political bombshell. GOP lawmakers immediately called for investigations into Hunter Biden's business dealings, demanding that the White House answer for these newly revealed accusations. In a rare move, Republican leaders called for the formation of a special committee, one that would dig deep into the Biden family's alleged entanglements with foreign powers. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, along with other prominent GOP figures, stood in front of cameras the day after Musk's interview, calling the allegations a matter of national security. If the president's family is engaged in illegal activities on foreign soil, we need to know. The American people deserve the truth, McConnell declared, his voice full of conviction. The Republican base, already skeptical of the Biden administration, rallied behind these words, seeing this as the breakthrough they had been waiting for. Meanwhile, on the other side of the aisle, Democrats were scrambling to manage the fallout. White House officials issued a statement within hours of Musk's interview, dismissing his claims as baseless and part of a broader political attack. This is nothing more than another smear campaign orchestrated by those who wish to undermine the president, a White House spokesperson declared. Despite the quick response, the damage had already been done. Musk, with his undeniable influence in the tech world and beyond, had created a narrative that no amount of spin could immediately erase. Within the political elite, whispers grew louder. Was Musk's evidence real? Or was he merely playing the part of a provocateur, someone with a penchant for stirring the pot? But even those who doubted Musk's sincerity couldn't ignore the fact that his allegations had opened a can of worms. Many began to ask if there was more to the story, more than what had been revealed in the past. The question hung in the air. If there was truth to Musk's words, what did that mean for the president's integrity, for the election, and for the future of the country? As the days passed, the media's role in shaping the narrative became increasingly important. For every major network that supported the White House's defense, there were just as many, if not more, that called for deeper scrutiny. CNN, MSNBC, and the Washington Post dug into the history of Hunter Biden's dealings, highlighting potential conflicts of interest and looking for any shred of evidence that could tie the president to his son's actions. On the other hand, Fox News, Newsmax, and conservative commentators gave full backing to Musk's claims, speculating on the possibility of even more damning evidence coming to light. As the debate raged on, some familiar names in politics and business entered the fray. Prominent Democratic strategists, who had once been part of Biden's inner circle, began to express their concerns in private. Was the Biden administration too deeply entrenched in scandals? Could this be the scandal that brought the House of Cards down? They cautioned the White House to take the allegations seriously, warning that the public's trust in the president was at stake. Biden's long-standing narrative of being the champion of the working class, the man who was above reproach, was suddenly in jeopardy. His team, once confident in his re-election prospects, now found themselves reevaluating the situation from every angle. The political turmoil began to spread beyond the media and into the streets. The nation was divided. Supporters of President Biden remained adamant in their defense, refusing to believe the allegations. This is just another political attack, they argued. They're trying to take down a good man. But as Musk's words reverberated, even the most loyal Democrats found themselves questioning the depth of the claims. Public opinion polls, which had shown Biden with a modest lead over potential Republican challengers, began to shift. Confidence in the president's ability to win a second term, once an almost foregone conclusion, began to erode. The president himself, who had spent his political career navigating controversies with a calm demeanor, now faced the crisis of a lifetime. Joe Biden, a man who had made his career on transparency, trust, and empathy, was caught in the crossfire. Behind closed doors, his advisors worked feverishly to craft a strategy for moving forward. The White House considered legal options, but every step felt like it could backfire. Legal action against Musk seemed unwise, given his public profile and wealth, and would likely only intensify the scrutiny. Denying the allegations entirely, as Biden's team had done in their initial statement, seemed to be insufficient as the press relentlessly pressed for more answers. A growing number of voters, even those who had supported Biden in the past, began to question his administration's ability to govern effectively. The president, who had prided himself on his decades of public service, now had to reckon with the idea that his legacy could be forever tainted by the actions of his son. In interviews, political analysts warned that this scandal, no matter the truth, could have far-reaching consequences. It wouldn't just damage Biden's re-election prospects. It could alter the entire political landscape. The issue was now bigger than Hunter Biden, bigger than even the White House. The integrity of the office of the president was being questioned, and the repercussions could extend to every branch of government. The political world was now on edge, unsure of what would happen next. Would the allegations amount to nothing more than a scandal that would fade with time? Or would this be the issue that defined the next election? The storm was just beginning, and for Joe Biden, the weeks ahead would decide whether his presidency and his legacy could survive the fallout. The storm that had begun with Elon Musk's Bombshell interview showed no signs of slowing down. If anything, it was intensifying, gaining speed and traction with each passing day. Musk had lit the fuse, and now the political establishment was scrambling to control the explosion that threatened to destroy careers and legacies. In Washington, the immediate response to the allegations was a cacophony of voices. Republican politicians demanding investigations, Democratic leaders defending the president, and legal experts weighing in on the validity of Musk's claims. But one thing was clear: the allegations could no longer be ignored. What had initially seemed like an off-the-cuff remark from a billionaire tech mogul was quickly evolving into a full-fledged political crisis. The public and the media had latched onto Musk's words with an insatiable appetite, and now, the question of whether Hunter Biden had been involved in illegal foreign dealings was at the forefront of the national conversation. Within the first few days of Musk's interview, a number of Republican leaders, eager to capitalize on the scandal, called for immediate investigations. House Republicans, with a unified front, demanded that Congress open formal inquiries into Hunter Biden's business dealings and his alleged ties to foreign entities. The chairman of the House Oversight Committee, Jim Jordan, publicly announced that his team would begin examining Musk's claims, aiming to uncover any evidence of corruption within the Biden family. The timing of this investigation could not have been more significant. With the election just around the corner, Republicans saw this as an opportunity to discredit the Biden administration and weaken the president's chances of securing a second term. For many on the right, Musk's claims had confirmed what they had suspected all along. that the Biden family had been involved in corruption on a global scale. "It's time for accountability," Jordan declared during a press conference, flanked by fellow Republicans. "The American people deserve the truth. We will leave no stone unturned in our investigation." But the Democratic response was far from one of defeat. The White House, caught off guard by the speed with which the allegations spread, scrambled to formulate a response. President Biden's communication team quickly released a statement, denouncing Musk's claims as baseless and part of a politically motivated smear campaign. The White House maintained that no evidence had been presented to substantiate the allegations, and it vowed to fight back against what they perceived as an unfounded attack. Despite the White House's defense, cracks were starting to form in the Democratic Party's unified front. As the weeks went on, more and more voices within the party began to express concern. Some senators and longtime allies of Biden, who had once been unwavering in their support, now questioned whether the president's association with his son would prove to be a liability in the upcoming election. While they publicly remained loyal, behind closed doors, there were discussions about how the party should navigate the growing controversy. Hunter Biden, now at the center of a media maelstrom, maintained a low profile. His legal team issued statements refuting the allegations, claiming that there was no factual basis for Musk's claims. However, the lack of a direct response from Hunter Biden himself only fueled further speculation. The president's son had been embroiled in legal issues before, but never had he been so closely linked to such a high-stakes political scandal. As his father's administration faced the heat, Hunter's silence was deafening. Public opinion was beginning to shift. The American people, already disillusioned with political gridlock and corruption scandals, now found themselves forced to reckon with the possibility that the very people in power may have been compromised. A recent poll showed that while a majority of Americans were still undecided about the veracity of Musk's claims, nearly half felt that the president and his family needed to answer questions about Hunter Biden's business dealings abroad. The poll numbers were a stark warning for the Biden administration. Time was running out, and they could no longer rely on political spin to brush the issue under the rug. As investigations began in Congress, the media's role in shaping the narrative became even more pronounced. The 24-hour news cycle was consumed by the scandal, with reporters digging deeper into Hunter Biden's past. The more they uncovered, the more questions arose. Leaked emails, business dealings, and financial records all came under the microscope. Some of the information painted a picture of a son leveraging his father's position for personal gain. Others, however, pointed to questionable business practices in countries where the U.S. had significant geopolitical interests. The investigation was taking on a life of its own, and the public was eating up every new revelation. One of the most explosive pieces of evidence that emerged came from an anonymous whistleblower, a former associate of Hunter Biden's business ventures in China. This whistleblower claimed to have worked with Hunter Biden on a number of deals that involved significant sums of money. According to their account, Hunter had used his family name and his father's political position to secure business opportunities in foreign markets. The whistleblower, while careful to avoid direct accusations, suggested that some of these deals could have involved improper or illegal activities. The media, which had initially been skeptical of Musk's claims, began to report on these new revelations as if they were facts. The Biden administration, under increasing pressure, had no choice but to acknowledge the scope of the investigation. In a televised address, President Biden assured the American people that his family's actions would be fully investigated. "I have nothing to hide," the president said, his voice calm but weary. "If there is wrongdoing, it will be dealt with. But let's be clear. These are allegations, and they are not yet proven. My family will cooperate fully with any legitimate investigation." The president's words were intended to reassure the public, but they did little to quell the growing sense of uncertainty. If anything, the admission that an official investigation was underway only heightened the tension. With the election looming, this scandal had the potential to dominate the entire political landscape. The Republican-controlled Senate quickly set a timeline for hearings, and it was clear that the investigation would continue throughout the remainder of Biden's campaign. In the midst of the chaos, there were those who warned that this scandal could overshadow all of the president's legislative accomplishments. The Biden administration had passed a major infrastructure bill, expanded healthcare coverage, and made strides in addressing climate change. But none of these achievements seemed to matter now. The focus had shifted, and the public's attention was squarely on the allegations surrounding Hunter Biden. The president, a seasoned political operator, knew that this could be a pivotal moment for his presidency. But what choices did he have? The truth, whatever it may be, would eventually come out, but in the meantime, the political fallout was wreaking havoc on his administration's credibility. As the investigation continued to gather steam, one thing became increasingly clear. No matter the outcome, the Biden family would never be able to shake the cloud of suspicion that now hung over them. The storm that Musk had unleashed was far from over, and its impact was beginning to extend beyond just the Biden family. For the political establishment, for the media, and for the American public, the battle for the truth had only just begun. As the days turned into weeks, the pressure on President Joe Biden intensified. The fallout from Elon Musk's Bombshell interview had cast a long, dark shadow over the White House. The public's trust in the administration was fraying, and each new revelation about Hunter Biden's dealings only seemed to widen the rift. Democrats, once united behind Biden, now faced a harsh reality. The allegations against the president's son were too serious to ignore. The political storm had grown into a full-fledged crisis, and Biden was forced to confront the possibility that his entire political future, along with his legacy, was now at risk. Biden, a seasoned politician with decades of experience, knew that every word, every decision, could mean the difference between survival and collapse. He had weathered political scandals before, but this was different. The allegations against his son were too closely tied to his own presidency, and the public was no longer willing to separate the two. Hunter Biden, a private citizen but one with significant ties to his father's political career, had placed both their fates in the crosshairs of the nation's scrutiny. Behind closed doors, Biden's advisors convened in an emergency meeting to discuss the next steps. The president was not one to shy away from a fight, but this was a battle unlike any he had faced. For the first time in his career, Biden found himself fighting not just for his political survival, but for his family's reputation as well. His team, composed of some of the most seasoned political strategists in the country, immediately began brainstorming ways to defuse the crisis. They knew that damage control would require more than just words. It would require a bold, decisive move. One of the first suggestions was for Biden to take a firm stand, to call for a full investigation into his son's actions in order to clear the air and demonstrate his commitment to transparency. While the idea of an internal investigation sounded appealing on the surface, it also presented significant risks. Any inquiry could potentially uncover more damaging details, further damaging the administration's credibility. A full investigation into Hunter Biden's business dealings could open a Pandora's box, leading to more revelations and intensifying the public's suspicions. Biden's political advisors, however, pressed for action. "We can't just sit back and wait for the storm to pass," one of his senior aides advised. "We need to show the American people that we are serious about getting to the truth. If there's nothing to hide, let's open the books and let them see for themselves." The suggestion was a calculated gamble, but it was one that Biden ultimately accepted. He knew that the longer the scandal dragged on, the more damage it would do to his administration. The American people needed to hear directly from him, not just from his aides or spokespeople. The president's response was measured, but it was clear that the stakes were higher than ever before. In a televised speech to the nation, Biden stood in front of the cameras, his expression somber but resolute. "My family and I have always held ourselves to the highest standards of integrity," Biden said. "I understand the gravity of the allegations that have been made, and I want to assure the American people that we are taking them seriously. We will cooperate fully with any legitimate investigation, and if any wrongdoing is found, we will address it accordingly." Biden's words were calm, but the weight of his decision was undeniable. By calling for an investigation, he had opened the door to an inquiry that could not be easily closed. He had placed the future of his presidency in the hands of the very system that was now questioning his integrity. Yet, in his mind, there was no other choice. The longer he remained silent or tried to downplay the allegations, the more the public would lose faith in his ability to lead. He had to take control of the narrative, even if it meant making himself vulnerable. As Biden made his speech, the political world watched closely. His approval ratings had already begun to slip, and there was no guarantee that the American people would buy his call for transparency. In fact, many of his opponents saw the president's decision as an admission of guilt, an attempt to divert attention from his son's actions by feigning cooperation. Republican lawmakers, sensing a political opening, wasted no time in criticizing Biden's response. If the president truly cared about transparency, he would have taken action sooner, said Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell. This looks like nothing more than a calculated political move to salvage his re-election campaign. Biden's gamble had placed him on a precarious tightrope. By advocating for an investigation, he had taken the moral high ground, but the political risks were enormous. In the eyes of many, this was not just about Hunter Biden anymore. It was about the entire Biden family, and by extension, the president himself. The narrative had shifted from one about potential corruption in the private sector to one about political corruption at the highest levels of government. If the investigation revealed even the slightest hint of wrongdoing, it would be catastrophic for Biden's presidency. Behind the scenes, Biden's campaign team worked furiously to manage the fallout. With the election looming, every move they made was now critical. Polls showed that the American public was deeply divided on the issue. Some were ready to believe that the allegations were a partisan attack, a way to take down the president before the election. Others, however, were beginning to lose faith in Biden, believing that there was more to the story than anyone was letting on. Biden's core base, which had once been solid, now appeared vulnerable. The longer the investigation dragged on, the more his political opponents would be able to chip away at his credibility. Despite the intense pressure, Biden remained focused on the long game. He knew that the only way to regain control of the narrative was to win back the trust of the American people. He needed to convince them that he was not just another politician willing to sweep uncomfortable truths under the rug. He needed to show them that he was committed to the truth, even if it meant exposing painful revelations about his own family. Yet, even as Biden sought to manage the crisis, new questions began to arise. The American public wanted answers, and they wanted them quickly. Some began to wonder if Biden's decision to publicly call for an investigation was a calculated political move designed to buy him time. Others questioned whether he was genuinely unaware of his son's dealings, or if he had turned a blind eye for the sake of political expediency. For Biden, the answers were not simple, and they were about to be tested in ways he never anticipated. In the coming weeks, Biden's presidency would be defined by how he handled the mounting political pressure. His ability to navigate this crisis would determine not only his re-election prospects, but also his place in history. The investigation into Hunter Biden was only beginning, and its outcome would either restore Biden's credibility or irreparably damage his political future. With the election drawing near, every move he made would be scrutinized, and his gamble on transparency could either be his salvation or his undoing. What had initially seemed like a political scandal on the fringes of American politics was now a full-blown crisis, threatening to engulf the Biden administration. As the investigation into Hunter Biden's foreign dealings gathered steam, the political fallout expanded far beyond Washington, D.C. It wasn't just about Hunter anymore. It was about Joe Biden's presidency, his legacy, and ultimately the future of his administration. The White House, once filled with optimism about the upcoming election, was now dealing with a storm that seemed to grow stronger with each passing day. In the days following Biden's public call for an investigation, the pressure on the administration intensified. While Biden had hoped that his call for transparency would quell the growing backlash, it did little to settle the storm. The media, ever eager to capitalize on the chaos, continued to churn out new reports, further stoking public fears that the Biden family had been involved in illegal activities. The claims Musk had made were only the tip of the iceberg, and now, new revelations were surfacing almost daily. Hunter Biden, meanwhile, became the focal point of the media's relentless pursuit of the truth. His personal life, which had already been subject to public scrutiny due to his past struggles with addiction and his business dealings, was now being dissected under a microscope. Leaked emails, text messages, and financial records painted a picture of a man whose connections to foreign business ventures were much deeper than anyone had previously imagined. What had once been a series of small scandals about his work in Ukraine and China now appeared to be part of a much larger, far-reaching web of questionable dealings that stretched across the globe. As the investigation progressed, more whistleblowers came forward, and some of Hunter Biden's former business associates began speaking out, adding fuel to the fire. These individuals provided testimony that supported Musk's claims, confirming that Hunter had used his father's position to secure lucrative business deals in foreign countries. One of the most significant revelations came from a former business partner in China, who claimed that Hunter had used his connections to secure multimillion-dollar contracts with Chinese firms, contracts that might have violated U.S. laws. The credibility of the allegations began to solidify in the eyes of many Americans. While the Biden administration continued to deny any wrongdoing, the repeated leaks and testimonies made it increasingly difficult to dismiss the claims as mere partisan attacks. The American public, already disillusioned with politics, now found itself deeply divided. For some, this was a breaking point. They viewed the allegations as proof of the entrenched corruption in Washington, where politicians and their families were able to operate above the law. These individuals, many of whom had voted for Biden in 2020, began to turn away from the president, disillusioned by the idea that a family in power could exploit their position for personal gain. The growing perception that the Bidens were part of a larger pattern of political corruption became a rallying cry for Biden's opponents, who used the scandal to galvanize their base. On the other hand, Biden's most loyal supporters refused to believe the allegations. To them, this was nothing more than another orchestrated attack by the political right. They argued that the accusations were part of a broader scheme to undermine Biden's presidency, especially with the election just around the corner. But even within this camp, doubt began to creep in. Democratic politicians, who had once stood by the president without hesitation, started questioning the extent of his involvement in his son's business dealings. Some privately suggested that Biden's ability to lead was being compromised by the scandal, and that it might be time for him to consider a change in strategy. The pressure from both sides of the political spectrum mounted. On the left, the fear of losing the next election due to the scandal was palpable. Polls showed Biden's approval ratings slipping, and the Democratic National Committee, DNC, began to panic. They knew that the president's image as a steady and reliable leader was beginning to crack, and without a solid lead in the polls, it would be difficult to fend off any challenges from the Republicans. On the right, Republicans saw an opportunity to not only secure the presidency, but to make significant gains in Congress as well. The scandal provided them with the ammunition they needed to paint Biden as corrupt, untrustworthy, and unfit for office. In the White House, the situation grew increasingly dire. Biden's advisors, once optimistic about his path to re-election, now found themselves caught in a whirlwind of uncertainty. They had spent months focusing on the president's legislative accomplishments, the American Rescue Plan, the infrastructure bill, and his handling of the COVID-19 pandemic. But now those successes were overshadowed by the allegations surrounding his family. The White House communications team worked around the clock, crafting speeches and statements to defend Biden's record. But each day seemed to bring new revelations that chipped away at his credibility. The president, for his part, remained stoic in public, but those close to him could see the toll the scandal was taking. Biden, who had spent decades as a public servant, was now grappling with the realization that his legacy, and perhaps his presidency, could be undone by his son's actions. The weight of the situation was clear in his private conversations with his staff. "I've fought my whole life for this country," Biden told one of his advisors late one evening. "But I don't know if I can survive this." The emotional strain was evident, and it was clear that Biden was beginning to question whether his political career was worth sacrificing his family's well-being. To complicate matters further, the political landscape was shifting rapidly. Public opinion on the scandal was becoming more polarized, and both Biden's support base and his opposition were doubling down on their positions. Social media had become a battleground, with each side amplifying its narrative. Hashtags calling for Biden's resignation trended on Twitter, while counter-hashtags rallied behind his defense. The media, caught between the two sides, struggled to balance their coverage, but the constant stream of news about Hunter Biden was beginning to overwhelm other important stories. The election, which had once seemed like a mere formality for the sitting president, now felt like a distant concern in the face of the scandal that had consumed the nation. Despite the mounting pressure, Biden held fast to his decision to cooperate with the investigation. However, his resolve was tested daily as new leaks, new accusations, and new revelations seemed to emerge from every corner. The damage to his political capital was becoming impossible to ignore, and with the election looming closer, Biden knew that time was running out. The next steps, whether they were to double down on his public stance or take a more conciliatory approach, would determine the future of his presidency. For Joe Biden, this was not just a political scandal. It was the defining moment of his career. The stakes had never been higher, and the crisis was far from over. Whether he would weather the storm or be swept away by it would depend on his ability to navigate the tumultuous waters of public opinion, political pressure, and personal loyalty. The coming weeks would be critical, and the ultimate outcome remained uncertain. As the investigation into his business dealings expanded, Hunter Biden found himself in the midst of a political storm that was threatening to destroy his family's legacy and his father's presidency. In the weeks after Elon Musk's Bombshell interview, the pressure on Hunter intensified, with the media scrutinizing every aspect of his life and business practices. Once a relatively private figure with a troubled past, Hunter was now thrust into the limelight as the central figure in one of the most politically charged scandals in modern American history. For Hunter, this moment was both familiar and terrifying. He had already weathered his fair share of public scrutiny. His struggles with addiction, his brief stint in the military, and his business dealings abroad had all been the subject of public discourse for years. But this was different. This wasn't just about his personal struggles or his relationship with his father. It was about whether his actions had compromised the integrity of the entire Biden family. The investigation had now escalated to a point where his personal life and business dealings were tied directly to the presidency of Joe Biden. And with every passing day, the stakes seemed to get higher. Hunter's response to the mounting allegations was cautious and calculated. He had learned, perhaps the hard way, that a hasty reaction could only make things worse. In private, he was struggling. The pressure was immense, and the thought that his past mistakes could potentially bring down his father's presidency weighed heavily on him. But he also knew that his silence was not an option. If the investigation was going to move forward, he would have to speak out and defend himself. He could not allow the media and political opponents to shape the narrative without offering his own perspective. In an exclusive interview with a prominent news outlet, Hunter Biden broke his silence. The interview was highly anticipated, with both supporters and critics of the Biden family eager to hear what he had to say. Sitting across from a seasoned journalist, Hunter appeared calm, though his eyes betrayed the emotional toll the scandal had taken on him. He knew the importance of the moment. This interview would be his opportunity to explain his side of the story and, perhaps, to save both his reputation and his father's presidency. "I know what people think of me," Hunter began, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "I've made mistakes. I've struggled with addiction, and I've made some poor decisions in my life. But I am not a criminal, and I did not use my father's position to further my business interests." Hunter's words were clear, but the challenge ahead was enormous. Despite his denials, the allegations against him were serious, and the public was no longer in the mood to offer second chances. The narrative that had taken shape over the past few weeks painted him as a man who had exploited his father's political career for personal gain. Hunter vehemently denied the accusations that he had used his family's name to secure business deals, especially with foreign entities. He emphasized that his business ventures, though controversial and poorly timed, had been legitimate business dealings. "I never used my father's office to get ahead," Hunter said, looking directly into the camera. "I've made mistakes in my business dealings, but I didn't break the law, and I didn't put my father in a compromising position." Despite his denial, it was clear that Hunter understood the gravity of the situation. He was speaking not just to defend himself, but to try to protect his father and the entire Biden legacy. The interview was well received by some, but the skepticism from critics remained as strong as ever. They pointed to Hunter's business dealings with foreign companies, particularly in Ukraine and China, as evidence that his father had been compromised. Even as Hunter tried to draw a line between his actions and his father's political career, many found it difficult to separate the two. After all, the Biden family's political influence was the very reason Hunter was able to enter those business deals in the first place. In the days following the interview, the media's scrutiny of Hunter did not let up. Every detail of his life was examined under a microscope. His past dealings in Ukraine with Burisma, a natural gas company, resurfaced with new intensity. Opponents of the Biden administration were quick to highlight these connections as evidence of corruption. They pointed out that Hunter had served on the board of Burisma while his father was vice president, raising questions about whether there was any quid pro quo involved. Hunter, for his part, repeatedly denied any wrongdoing, stating that he had never discussed his business dealings with his father. But the damage had already been done. The accusations against Hunter were now inseparable from the broader narrative about his father's administration. As more information came to light, the public became increasingly divided. For many, the idea that Hunter's actions could have jeopardized the integrity of the highest office in the land was too much to ignore. The questions were no longer just about Hunter Biden. They were about the character and transparency of Joe Biden himself. Hunter's legal team worked tirelessly to push back against the growing tide of accusations. They began to leak information about the investigation, trying to discredit some of the evidence being presented as biased or taken out of context. But these leaks only fueled the fire. As much as Hunter tried to maintain control of the narrative, it became apparent that the more he spoke out, the more he seemed to attract new questions. The public wanted answers, and they wanted them fast. Meanwhile, inside the White House, the situation grew increasingly tense. Hunter's public defense only complicated the administration's efforts to regain control of the situation. The president's advisors were caught in a bind. On one hand, they knew they had to support Hunter. He was their family, after all. But on the other hand, they knew that his continued involvement in the scandal was becoming a liability. The longer Hunter remained in the spotlight, the harder it became for the administration to avoid accusations of corruption. For Joe Biden, the personal toll of the scandal was becoming impossible to ignore. In private, he expressed deep concern for his son, but he also feared the long-term political damage the scandal could inflict on his presidency. Biden's advisors, who had once been optimistic about his re-election prospects, now found themselves grappling with the reality that Hunter's actions might be the breaking point.